We're joined by our high school insider out on Long Island, Corey Winkoff of FLG Lacrosse. Corey, FLG does the String King Game of the Week, and here in the early go, you had two games. Let's start with Cold Spring Harbor renewing the rivalry with Manhasset. How was that game?
Yeah, it was a great game, Jesse. Cold Spring Harbor ended up getting the best of Manhasset in the game, but it was really tight. It was a one-goal game where Manhasset scored pretty late. It's about a minute left. Looked like they were going to come back there, but Cold Spring Harbor, led by Kevin Winkoff and a really strong defense, ended up securing the victory. Cold Spring is definitely senior heavy on the defensive end. Chris Porzelt, starting goalie, Hunter Guarneri, Aiden Hiffy, to name a few returners, as well as Teddy Bentley at the midfield. So Cold Spring, along with their senior leaders, ended up pulling out a victory against what I think is going to be a really good Manhasset team, even though they ended up coming up short in this game. I think if they decide to really figure it out with some of their young stars, led by Louis Perfetto along with Aiden Mulholland, I think this group is going to be super competitive moving through the season. So a great game. Cold Spring Harbor ended up winning, but Manhasset's definitely a team to watch out for the rest of the season.
So we got a nice little breakdown from you Thursday night on Lacrosse Now, but the other game, the Sewanee Cup between Hewlett and Lynbrook, turned out to be a pretty good one, huh?
Yeah, it was a great game, a rivalry game, which meant that the atmosphere was a little bit more intense. There was a lot of hooting and hollering going into the game, and the play out there was definitely a lot more physical and a little bit grittier than your typical Nassau County lacrosse game. So the Sewanee Cup is something that gets awarded to the winning team, and it was in possession of the Owls of Lynbrook for years and years. And it wasn't until this game the past week that Hewlett ended up getting the best of Lynbrook and taking home the cup, thanks to two senior captains on Hewlett, Alex Verdaro, as well as Gavin Adler, two kids that are going to be going to the Ivy League next year. And those guys are on a mission to not just win the cup, but they feel as though they're legitimate contenders to be one of the top teams in Nassau Class B. So that was a great game, a gritty one, and ended up going in the favor of Hewlett Bulldogs. So a good one to be a part of.
And as far as the girls are concerned, to you, an upset alert regarding the Syosset girls. Am I saying that right? These Long Island teams.
Yeah, no, the Syosset girls upset number 2 nationally ranked Garden City, which was a huge win. And I just have to give credit to the Syosset team because it's one that's kind of flown under the radar, but year after year, they're getting better and better, and they're knocking on the door as becoming one of the perennial teams in Nassau County Conference 1, which is that power conference. So not only did they beat Garden City, led by Taylin Stadler, who's a girl going to UPenn. She went 1-5 against GC, and she's just a fantastic leader on the field. But they also won 2 really good quality games against both Oceanside and a game against West Hampton, which is a really good school out in Suffolk County. They won that one with about 2.5 seconds left on the clock. So Syosset's starting 3-0, beating Garden City. They're heading down now to Disney World for their spring break, so they're going into that trip feeling pretty good. And credit to Coach Lauren Lamonaco's team. They're on a roll right now, so it's cool to see.
You mentioned a couple names right there, but who have been some standout players on the island in the early part of the year?
For sure. Let's start with the girls' side of things. Hannah Dorney is a midfielder going to Notre Dame on Comswag. She just reached the 150 career goal mark. She's a fantastic two-way player, plays great defense. She's on the drawer. She's obviously a great goal scorer, scoring over 150 goals, so she's someone to mention. Also, Jen Barry, she plays for Middle Country, a team that went to the state championship last year in Suffolk County. And Middle Country, they also, not only they lost in the state championship, unfortunately, but they also lost Jamie Ortega, who was labeled as one of the top players, not just on Long Island, but also in the country. So Middle Country hasn't really gotten the credit I feel as though they deserve this year. They just beat Smithtown West, who is ranked above them, led by Jen Barry. So she's a really good player and someone to key in on as well. I mentioned Taylin Stadler, fantastic player for Syosset. I also would like to mention Belle Smith, who's a sophomore committed to BC. She plays for West Hampton, a team that just recently lost, as I mentioned, to Syosset. But this girl is a sophomore sensation. She's a fantastic midfielder, does it all, and she's one to definitely key in on for the rest of the year. And then if we shift over to the boys' side a little bit, I would like to mention 4 players real quick. Matt Olbetter of Farmingdale, a kid who tore his ACL last year. He missed not just last year, but the year prior, unfortunately, due to injuries from football. He's someone that has led Farmingdale to 2 straight wins. They're 2-0 on the season. Pete LaSala is a kid that's going to Virginia. He plays for Rocky Point. I think he's probably the best player on Long Island. He faces off. He's a two-way midfielder. He's got over 10 points on the year. He does it all for a Rocky Point team that's not very deep. They're not great, but he's definitely a standout player and worth mentioning. Alex Verdaro, we talked about earlier. He's a Hewlett stud who's going off to Princeton. He's got over 16 points in 3 games, and he's really the glue for that team, and a kid who I also feel as though is one of the best players on Long Island. And then last but not least, Joe Pareca, a great name, also a great kid. He's from Mount Sinai. He just led his team to a big win over Sachem East, which is another solid Suffolk County team. So that's another player that has been doing really well over the last week and someone to track throughout the year.
So now that we know who to keep our eyes on, what's up next for your games of the week?
All right, so I'm going to give you 2 String King games to key in on. Next week, we're going to be going to Massapequa Chaminade. That game is called Public versus Private because Massapequa, one of the best public school teams here on Long Island. Chaminade, one of the best parochial private school teams on Long Island. So it's always a treat to see a public school play a private school because it's your typical town versus club. You know, it's kind of like your local regional team versus your USA team. So that game kind of has that feel of a rivalry game, but it's also gives you bragging rights. Who's better, the public or the private? So that's a game we'll be at on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, we're going to be heading over to West Islip Ward Melville, calling that the final chapter. And that title kind of comes from a rivalry that has existed for the existence of Coach Scott Craig's reign at West Islip. He's been there for over 34 years. This is his last season. He declared retirement after this season, and he has built a rivalry up between West Islip and Ward Melville, one in which Ward Melville always had the best of West Islip, and that definitely shifted over his tenure over at Islip. So that's going to be a really good game. Could be the last time that they play against one another with Coach Scott Craig as the head coach of West Islip, and that's going to be an absolute treat. And then on the girls' side, we're checking out 2 awesome games on Tuesday. You have Eastport South Matter versus Mattituck. ESM, they won a county championship last year. Awesome Suffolk team versus a small Mattituck team that, although they are small, they return every single player on that team, and they are super talented. So that's going to be a really good game. Right after that, FLG is going to be driving to see Shoreham-Wading River play Bayport Blue Point, 2 small Class C schools in Suffolk County who are awesome. They're 1 goal away from potentially both winning not just a county championship, but these teams can win Long Island and state championships here in New York. So I'm really excited to see all those teams play next week when it's actually spring break. So not much school going on. A lot of the focus is just going to be on lacrosse, and our life is all about lacrosse. So it's a no-brainer for us to just go to all these games. So I'm really excited.
Living that lax life. All right, he's Corey Winkoff. Check out FLG Lacrosse at flglacrosse.com. Corey, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jess. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you guys next week.
Sounds good.